Welcome to the 1864 Current Events News. I'm your host, Venus Pluto. Today we will be discussing the impact and events of the Civil War. Our first guest is Saturn Twist, a Confederate nurse stationed in Florida.
Thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this newscast.
Saturn, the war has lasted 3 years so far. How long do you think until the end?
I think that the war so far has been very close to call, but I think that this hostile bit of war will only last one more year.
Well, there obviously has been many disagreements between the North and South of the U.S., but what do you think are the actual causes of the war?
I think the war was caused by many things, but mostly the thought of slavery expansion in the West. Also contributing to the war was sectionalism, states' rights, and economic issues.
Our president, Abraham Lincoln, was elected in 1861. He had to make a very hard decision when the issue of slavery arose. How did he react?
Abe said that he would not interfere with slavery that already existed, but he cut off the expansion of it to the West.
The first major battle of the war was Bull Run. Bull Run was also called Manassas. The rebels' leader of Bull Run was Stonewall Jackson. How did General Jackson die? Because people say that he had a very interesting death.
Jackson was riding to check the enemy lines, and upon returning, his own troops mistook him for a Union soldier and fired. He then lost his left arm and died days later from pneumonia and wounds.
The next battle was the Battle of Shiloh. How did Jackson's death affect Shiloh?
At first, his death didn't seem to have a huge effect on the Confederate Army, because at the Battle of Shiloh, the Confederate forces nearly wiped out all of the Union forces when they attacked on the first day. However, this was a victory for the Union because General Grant led them in counterattack the next day.
The next battle was the Battle of the Ironclads. Ironclads are boats made of steel and iron, and they are very hard to defeat because not many weapons can cause damage to them.
Correct. A quick fact about the Battle of the Ironclads is that the Confederacy built the Merrimack from a sunken Union ship and covered it in iron. We used it against the North's ironclads, the Monitor. This was the first ever battle of the Ironclads.
Robert E. Lee became commander of the Confederacy because General Joseph E. Johnston was injured. How did Lee prove as a commander?
Robert was a very able commander. He led us through a lot of the war.
Now, there were a lot of battles in the Civil War, but which battle do you think was the most brutal?
Oh, Antietam. It had 23,000 casualties and also was the most hostile.
How many battles were fought at Antietam?
5 battles were fought over 14 hours.
Now let's talk about Gettysburg. Instead of returning all the casualties from Gettysburg, they had just one big funeral for all of the dead men. This was called the Gettysburg Address.
Yes, President Lincoln was invited to attend, and this is where his famous 2-minute speech took place, and it began with 70 years ago.
165,000 people were killed by non-military causes, which is mostly disease, during the Civil War. What other impact did the war have on the Confederacy?
The estimated cost of the war, and what I would imagine 2013's currency, would be $2.10 billion. Also, 93,000 people were killed in battle.
Thank you, Saturn, for your time and information. Next, we have Tallulah Mars, a Union nurse from Pennsylvania.
It's such a pleasure to be able to share my knowledge about the Civil War with all the other citizens out there.
Tallulah, at Fort Sumter, Lincoln sent troops. Some people are confused about this. Why did he send his troops?
Lincoln was sending food for the hungry men. The Confederates didn't believe him and attacked.
We all know that the North had a plan called the Anaconda Plan. What was this plan and how did it work?
The plan was to blockade the Navy from Louisiana to Virginia. This would gain control of the Mississippi River and its mouth. The goal was that the South wouldn't be able to trade and it would choke them out.
Stonewall Jackson became famous at Bull Run. How did he get his nickname?
When we saw Jackson and his troops approach us, he stood stubbornly and firmly like a stone wall.
Now, after Bull Run, McClellan became leader of the Yankees. What was he like as a general?
He was very popular with the troops and very thorough. However, some people viewed him as overly cautious. Not to mention, he was a hit with the ladies.
Well, they didn't mention that in the textbooks.
Yes, now let us please move on.
Now, let's talk about the Emancipation Proclamation. It was issued right after Antietam in 1862. What exactly is it?
It was that the slaves were freed only in territories of the rebellion, because before the war, banning slavery was against the Constitution because it took away property.
Following the Emancipation Proclamation was the Battle of Chancellorsville,
which was another victory for the Union.
Some people say that the turning point of the war was Gettysburg. Gettysburg lasted a total of 7 days. Now, we know that this battle was not planned. How did the two armies end up meeting?
Both the Confederate and Union armies met by surprise while gathering supplies in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. By the third day of the battle, General Pickett ordered his troops, "Don't shoot until you see the whites of their eyes."
At Gettysburg, how many men died?
The Confederacy lost 28,000 men, which was 1/3 of the army. The Union lost 23,000 men, which was 1/4 of their army.
Now we know that President Lincoln was assassinated on April 14th, 1865 at Ford's Theater. Who shot Honest Abe?
John Wilkes Booth, an actor possibly at Ford's Theater, and a huge conspiracy was the assassinator.
Overall, 111,000 Union soldiers were killed in action during the Civil War. 250,000 died of non-military causes. What other impacts did the war have on the Union territory?
Over 275,000 were wounded. The estimated cause in 2013's currency would be $6.19 billion.
Thank you, Tulula, for sharing your knowledge.
You're very welcome.
This has been the 1864 Current Events News. I am your host, Venus Pluto, and our guests today were Southern Belle, Saturn Twix, and the always lovely Brit, Tulula Mars. Next, we have Tallulah Mars, a Union nurse from Pennsylvania.
It's such a pleasure to be able to share my knowledge about the Civil War with all the other citizens out there.
Anita, don't do that till later because don't. Because you're just like,
wait, I thought we were going to do 2 different videos.
No, we don't have to anymore. The issue with the 2 different videos is passing off. The Confederacy lost 28,000 people, which was 1/3 of the army. The Union lost 23,000 people, which was 1/4 of their army.
President Lincoln was assassinated on April 14th, 1865.
That's my dad's birthday.
I'm your host, Venus Pluto, and today will be
Okay, start over because she didn't get the first part.
Welcome to the 1864 Current Events News. I'm your host, Venus Pluto, and today we will be talking about the impact and events of the Civil War. Stop! No. Okay. This is Southern Belle, Saturn Twixer, Twix, and this is the British person, Tallulah Mars. News.
Oh,
I'm Saturn Twix!
So, now knowing what you know about the Civil War, Miss Venus, you'd rather be a rebel, right?
Or a Yankee. Or a Yankee.
I think it's time to give me some more coffee.
Let's go. Let's
No,
finish
no, rebels! Rebels!
Just like Chancellor's